On January 15, 2009, the city of New York was embracing a cold winter's day, but the skies were relatively clear above LaGuardia Airport, where a U.S. Airways Airbus A320 was preparing for Flight 1549, headed to Charlotte, North Carolina. Aboard this flight were 150 passengers carrying their hopes and plans for the day, along with a crew of 5. In the cockpit sat Captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger, a seasoned pilot with over 4 decades of experience, and his first officer, Jeffrey Skiles. This was a routine flight, carrying no harbinger of doom. It was just another takeoff on an ordinary day, a calmness that lasted for only 120 seconds after departure. At exactly 3:25 p.m., the plane lifted off the runway and soared into the sky. But catastrophe did not take long to strike. At an altitude of approximately 2,818 feet above the ground, while the aircraft was traversing the airspace near the George Washington Bridge, a massive flock of Canadian geese collided with the jet. The impact was not partial or one-sided. It was a destructive, comprehensive collision, as both jet engines ingested a large number of birds simultaneously. The powerful, dependable roar of the jet engines transformed into a tremendous, explosion-like boom, followed by a sudden, terrifying silence never before heard inside an aircraft during flight. Passengers inside felt violent tremors, smelled a faint burning odor, and some saw brief flashes of fire emanating from the disabled engines. That was the pivotal moment that determined the fate of 155 souls. In the cockpit, the reality was chillingly clear, a complete loss of thrust in both engines. The aircraft, which only seconds before had been a flying machine in every sense of the word, rapidly became nothing more than a heavy gliding object, steadily and alarmingly losing altitude. Sully, with a composure his first officer later described as textbook, initiated emergency procedures while reporting the situation to air traffic control with a concise and shocking statement. "Hit birds. We've lost thrust. We're turning back to LaGuardia." However, the initial calculations, performed by Sully in a fraction of a second based on his accumulated experience, screamed the bitter truth. The plane would not make it back. The speed and altitude were insufficient, and attempting a sharp maneuver to return meant a certain crash over populated neighborhoods, turning the aerial disaster into a ground catastrophe of immense proportions. In a second attempt, air traffic control asked about the possibility of landing at the nearby Teterboro Airport, but Sully looked out the window and realized the plane would not be able to glide far enough to reach the runway. The window of time for a life-or-death decision was just a few seconds. In those brief, pivotal moments, as the aircraft plummeted, Captain Sully made the call that would go down in aviation history as the most courageous and judicious decision under pressure: an emergency ditching on the Hudson River. The river was the only long, flat strip that could absorb the impact of the landing without causing the aircraft to disintegrate over a residential area. Sully informed the tower with the words that echoed in the control room: "We're going to be in the Hudson." There was no time for panic. There was only time for perfect execution. The cabin crew immediately sprang into action. Sully issued the famous command, "Brace for impact." As passengers assumed the crash position, Sully prepared the aircraft for the most critical maneuver in civil aviation: ditching. For this operation to succeed, he had to hit the water's surface at a precise speed and angle, maintaining level wings to prevent the aircraft from flipping over or breaking apart upon impact. Any slight tilt would mean a catastrophic breakup and the death of everyone on board. Sully was fighting time, fighting physics, and fighting despair. He executed a masterful glide, turning the force of gravity into a tool for aircraft control until he could see the reflection of the plane on the freezing surface of the river at 3:31 p.m. Only 208 seconds after the bird strike, the aircraft touched the water. The landing was unbelievably smooth and precise, like an amphibian aircraft coming to rest. It was the work of a master pilot. A massive plume of spray rose, and then the aircraft settled slowly, becoming a floating vessel in the heart of the icy Hudson River. There was no time to rest. The second challenge had begun: evacuation. The frigid water, only about $5 \C, began to seep into the cabin. The crew moved with lightning speed, opening emergency exits and directing passengers onto the wings and the inflatable slides, which now served as temporary life rafts. Amidst the shouts, panic, and extreme cold, the cabin crew's instructions were the lifeline everyone clung to. Meanwhile, the news spread like wildfire, and the scene transformed into a stage for multiple acts of heroism. Rescue boats, commercial ferries, and Coast Guard vessels operating on the river rushed to the site within minutes, retrieving the passengers who faced the immediate threat of hypothermia in the severely cold water. But the most inspiring moment was when Captain Sully returned to the cabin twice, ensuring with his own eyes that no one was left behind, not even the injured or the shell-shocked. He was the last person to leave the slowly sinking aircraft, a living embodiment of leadership and responsibility. Every single person on board was rescued, 155 individuals, in a genuine miracle. The incident was followed by a prolonged investigation by the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, to determine every detail of the accident and the decision Sully had made. Despite initial speculation about the possibility of returning to a nearby airport, computer simulations conclusively proved that ditching in the river was the only viable option, once the necessary human reaction time for decision-making was factored in. The miracle on the Hudson proved that human experience and judgment are irreplaceable, and Captain Sully not only saved 155 lives, but provided a practical lesson in crisis management and heroism, ensuring that that day, January 15th, would be etched into the memory of New York as the day human courage triumphed over the brute force of emergency.